Hi, welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Cynthia Dickstein. Imagine living in a country where the government allows no public scrutiny, no access to facts and information, no accountability. Imagine living in a country where that government can access your financial information, put you on a watch list, search your house, and monitor your every move without telling you and without taking the appropriate legal measures. Imagine living in a country where you can be arrested and imprisoned secretly and indefinitely without access to a lawyer. Sadly, you live in such a country. Join us as we talk about the dismantling of democracy in America. Our focus for today's discussion will be on government secrecy and surveillance. With us for this discussion, we have two very special guests. Kemper, assistant professor from the University of Arizona, Department of Journalism, who researches free expression issues, and David Cuillier, also assistant professor in the Department of Journalism at the University of Arizona and vice chair of the Society of Professional Journalists Freedom of Information Committee. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
David, just how difficult is it to get information from the government these days?
Well, we're finding it pretty difficult. It's gotten worse progressively over the past decade in particular, and I think what we're seeing is a lot of federal records being closed down in the name of national security, in the name of privacy, a variety of factors, and it's something that we're pretty concerned about. Some of it supposedly is for good reasons, and I think, and some of it is. I mean, we have to protect ourselves, and I think that's a valid way of protecting our society. But I think we're seeing it go a little beyond that. And the classifications of federal records were about 3.5 million records in 1995, and today it's upwards of 16 million. It's more than quadrupled. And so I think the government at the federal level is more secretive, and I think even at the state and local levels it's more secretive. We call it trickle down, and that's a big concern.
Has this been, would you blame this entirely on 9/11, or did this start shortly before then or a long time before then?
Well, what we saw was things starting before 9/11, and there was a big push with the Bush administration coming in 2000 for secrecy, with figuring out how decisions were being made with oil, energy policy, other issues. We definitely saw an increase, and I think part of it could be the Bush administration trying to reassert executive power, trying to regain what was lost after Nixon lost a lot of executive power when he got in trouble. So we saw a lot of clamping down when that overtook, when that came in around 2000. 9/11 just kind of helped it along at a higher rate.
What's going to happen now that we are going to be at war indefinitely? I mean, this war on terror can go on and on and on, and if that's the justification used for this secrecy, there's no end in sight, is there, Kevin?
No, I don't think there is. There's something called Siebert's second proposition in free expression theory, and basically the more we're at conflict, at war, the more that freedoms of press, freedoms of information constrict. I think we'll get to a point where the tension that creates will have political fallout. So it'll be interesting what kind of response there'll be by the American public, because I think the American public will grow weary, if it hasn't already, of the secrecy, of the lack of forthrightness.
Mm-hmm. With this push for a stronger executive and all that comes out every day about abuses without authorization, would you say that Bush has contempt for the rule of law, the Bush administration, or would you say that he just thinks he's doing his job?
You know, I have a hard time speaking to that because I don't know what he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea, and all I know is what's happened, and so, you know, for why it's happened, it's hard to tell. I mean, clearly, I think people are concerned about terrorists, and rightly so. I mean, that really hit hard in America. I think Americans are fearful. I think the fear was greater right after 9/11. It's starting to wane. And the fear of death affects our psyche. There's research right here at the University of Arizona that's shown that. Dr. Jeff Greenberg in psychology, he came up with this terror management theory that says that when we think of death, our attitudes change. And a study just a few years ago showed that sure enough, you think about death, your own death, and you're more likely to support the president, you're more likely to oppose his opponents. And the study I did showed you're more likely to support censorship. So, you know, this affects how we think. Now, whether the president is playing on that, I don't know. But I do know that that the public appears to be willing to go along with that. I think that's waning a little bit.
It's not as if this is the first time in our history that this has happened. One almost wonders if it's part of the human condition or part of what happens when power, you know, just feeds on itself. But Abe Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. You know, we had the Alien and Sedition Acts, and we imprisoned Japanese people during the war. But the Bill of Rights guarantees us a lot of things that we're not seeing a lot of these days. Freedom of expression, freedom from arbitrary arrest, the right to privacy, protection under unreasonable search and seizure, and due process of the law. And those have just taken a real back seat to this surveillance issue. And if you'll just let me mention this, the ACLU lists among its top 10 power abuses since the Bush administration took office, spying on peaceful, law-abiding Americans who are exercising their First Amendment rights, wiretapping of innocent Americans without court approval or congressional authority, and the growing surveillance society. How expansive is this surveillance, Kevin?
Well, to discuss how expansive it is, let me tell you a micro story. Just this last weekend, my family and I flew back to Columbia, Missouri, where I went through ceremonies, you know, having finished my Ph.D. last year and finished my law degree this year. And we were going through the airport in St. Louis to get back on the plane. And this also happened when we were in the Tucson airport. And my daughter had broken her leg. She's 13. And so she has a boot. And so she sets off the metal detector. Well, because that set off the metal detector, they had to search her. And I watched, and I can't tell you they didn't do anything, quote, inappropriate. And they were very kind. But I can't tell you the chills that it gave me, how, you know, they would, you know, and the lady put gloves on and she was searching her, patting her down like she was under arrest or something. You know, like she you know, she was going to have a shoe bomb in her, in her boot. Okay, so that's a micro example that happens every single day in the United States. Every single day in the United States, with rare exception, each person is videotaped by a security camera. Today I stopped and bought gas, you know, where there are video cameras, and people say, well, we have to be able to find out who the bad guys are if, you know, if we get burglarized, or if we, you know, somebody holds up the store, something like that. And so I think it's kind of a frog in the kettle syndrome. My concern isn't so much that we have a lot of blatant totalitarianism. My concern is that it creeps, it's insidious. You know, next thing you know, what else are we getting used to? Because, well, we had an attack a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, and therefore we're going to justify doing these things. And I made the comment to my daughter, who wants to be president of the United States someday, and I said, you know, I think that really pushes the Fourth Amendment, don't you? And, you know, she wasn't quite sure. She had to think about that. She's just 13. But I wanted her to know my concern. I wonder how many other people are concerned. My guess is not as many as we would hope that people accept this. They want to feel safe. They want to feel like the bad people are under control. And the problem is that, the terrorists, I'll give Bush some credit. He says that we fight totalitarianism, and I do think that there are people who are fighting the United States who would like to see us have less liberty. Well, guess what? We do. I'm hard-pressed to say we're winning the war if that happens.
Mm-hmm. And you're giving him credit because...
I'm giving him credit because he points that out. Oh. But what bothers me is the hypocrisy that it's his administration, supposedly representing us, that's making these decisions to combat totalitarianism with things that seem to be totalitarianism in themselves. Mm-hmm. And they look different, and the Bush administration wants to distinguish the United States from the rest of the world, but we're losing a lot of freedom every day. We're losing access to information. We're losing, privacy, legitimate privacy interests. Every single day we have less and less liberty. That's one of the stated goals of the terrorists. So that concerns me.
I often wonder how much of this has to do with terrorism and how much has to do with the fact that we have this growing technology, and if you've got it, you want to use it, but that there's such a marriage between big business and government, and this surveillance benefits both of them. When you get I don't know what you call them, the little cards in the grocery store, and you present it in order to get the sale, they know every single thing you've bought in that store.
Well, I don't think it's accidental that our president and vice president come directly from the corporate world. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's by accident that what is considered status quo, standard operating procedure, in a corporate environment has been superimposed into the government. And I think that the more that large corporations are in agreements with government to access information, then I think there's more of an opportunity for civil liberties, civil rights to constrict.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that people truly know how extensive this is, that they know about data mining and the secret databases and the collection of personal information and reading our emails and
Well, I think we have a growing awareness of problems. Just this week, my wife and I each got a letter from the University of Missouri, where we both studied and we both worked. Somebody hacked into the computer system there and accessed our name and social security numbers. And so we're going to have to take the time to contact the credit bureaus and whatnot and protect that. But this need to streamline things and to put it into computers is pretty neat. On one hand, people think, oh, that's cool, we can do this. We can manipulate this information. But I don't know Dave's feelings about this, but I'd be curious to know if he agrees that I think there's a lot of information out there for journalists, but it's not the kind of information that really makes a difference. I think it would be easier for me to try and find somebody's social security number through data mining or paying $50 on the internet than it would be to find out, details of, what a government official's doing. I don't need somebody's social security number. It's not necessary as a journalist to be able to do that. Rarely can I think of a situation where that would be appropriate. But I sure want to know what the government's doing.
Sure.
So that's it's a perverse paradox that we have so much information out there and so much of our information is being mined, but we can in turn get the real information that we need to make better decisions as citizens.
And it seems that as soon as one bit of legislation is passed giving power to the government, that another one comes along. I mean, we started, I think, with the Patriot Act, and we've had the Postal Accountability Enhancement Act, which I would venture to guess hardly anyone has heard of, but it allows them to read our mail, and the Military Commissions Act. of last year, which the New York Times says is a tyrannical law that will be ranked with the lowest points, one of the lowest points in American democracy. Which one of these, can you point to one of these that has been the most destructive to democracy? Or
well, I can't speak to democracy. The Patriot Act hurt us as far as knowing what our government's up to, and a bunch of them followed. You know, I'd have to say, I think we are seeing a backlash with the change of Congress last year. There's different legislation that's coming forth now. And so, for example, the Open Government Act of 2007, that's alive, and that may actually fly. So you know, we're a country of checks and balances, and that's kind of key, of accountability in it, and not only different government branches checking each other, but the public checking the government. And I think we're starting to see that now. I think the American people want some accountability and want some checks and are tired of what's going on. And we see that all through history, like you said earlier. And I think we're going in a different direction now. Almost every state now has a coalition for open government that's working hard. We're seeing legislation passing around the country that's starting to open things up again. So I think things are changing. I mean, we'll see what happens. But, you know, as far as those things you talked about, you know, they may be repealed before long or changed.
so your thinking then is that shortly after 9/11, when the American public seemed to think that, okay, all these restrictions against our civil liberties are worth it, and to catch the bad guys, and anyway, we're not doing anything wrong, so therefore we don't have to worry. Well, of course, I want to come up with a huge argument against that rationale, but I think it sounds like you believe that they've changed, they've come away from that a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't say, I mean, they is a lot of people, but the administration I don't think's changed much, and they're still resistant to change, but but we have people that are putting pressure in this country on the administration, Congress, the courts, the American people, the public opinion polls, which as much as people hate them, play a huge role in what happens in our country. And research is showing that public attitudes toward these things are pretty strong, and that people want accountability. You ask people, what's most important in government? Efficiency, effectiveness, or accountability? And in our country, we usually choose accountability. There are a lot of efficient governments out there, and I'd love it if we had an efficient government, but dictatorships are efficient. In America, I think we like accountability, even if it's a little less efficient, because we can keep an eye on it and it won't intrude on our lives. As Kevin was saying, the government has more information about us, but we have less information about it. And that's not what we're about.
It's not what we're supposed to be about.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you were asking about a particular statute, particular case or something that somehow represents the biggest threat to democracy. And I like to propose that there's been a long-standing trend, probably since World War II, maybe before, that I see that concerns me, that I think maybe we look too much to government. You know, I don't think we look too much to government for answers to certain things, and by that I mean there are a lot of things that Clinton and Bush have had in common. You know, they're both globalists, and some of the purposes of globalization is to subsume local culture, is to bring everybody into one. You know, I believe in freedom of the press for all people, but I get really concerned about efforts through globalization to jam that down people's throats. It has to be the people's choice. It doesn't need to be somebody else telling other people, whether it's big business, a government, it doesn't matter who, people tend, I think, to resist outside controls. But they embrace outside controls when they're afraid, when they need a sense of safety. You know, they need to kind of pull that quilt over them and feel all nice and warm and fuzzy and feel safe. But then they realize that they've abdicated a lot of responsibility to others. You know, government was supposed to be self-government. You know, matter of fact, out in my car for summer reading, I'm taking home my copy of Locke, and I plan on reading a lot of Locke this summer. And you know, he said the government had three purposes. You know, preserve life, liberty, and property. And Bastiat, who was a French economist and journalist, wrote in the 1830s about how government either enables people to plunder life, liberty, and property, or it protects. And this vision of government, whether you're Democrat, Republican, I'm really concerned that, you know, that there is this there's this over-centralization of power in just a few, and that, you know, there are these globalist efforts to subsume the individual, subsume the family, subsume cultures. And, you know, I think it goes beyond partisanship. A lot of people are really tired of partisanship. You know, what they really want to do is get back to the values that really undergird who we are as a people. And that's freedom for me to be able to say, okay, tomorrow I want to go to Detroit, or I want to buy a tent, or, you know, whatever decisions I want to make. I want to be able to make those decisions without the government telling me whether I can or tracking whether I do. You know, one thing that really concerned me, but it died for lack of funding, I've heard. Remember Admiral Poindexter of the Iran-Contra scandal? Mm-hmm. Back right after 9/11, he headed a government agency that was attempting to through computers, bring together all these computer databases. And I don't think, even though it's Hollywood, I don't think it's too far from reality when you see on these TV shows and the government's chasing the bad guy, and all of a sudden they put up on a computer screen this dossier of people. I wouldn't be surprised at all that they have that technology, and probably more than even Hollywood would let on. And so Big Brother knows what you're doing. We're in a situation where you have to ask Big Brother for permission to do things. That's not the America I was taught that we were supposed to be, and I don't know that we ever truly were, but if we don't remember that aspiration, I'm really concerned that you know, it's the frog in the kettle syndrome. You know, we're just going to be boiled to death instead of hopping out.
But I wonder if we are, to use another metaphor, if we're swimming upstream here because of technology and because of, it seems that there are almost three things at work here, which we alluded to earlier, the marriage between corporate America and the government. And also, and we didn't get into this too much because we've covered it so much in previous shows, but obviously, without the complicity of the press, many of these secret actions wouldn't have been able to take place as effectively as they have. So, you know, and then you get to the American people, because USA Today reported in 2006 about the NSA's doing its phone records, and people just seem to sit back and take it. And, you know, I was a 60s kid, so I'm used to dissent. I'm used to seeing people in the streets, and I'm wondering, you know, Howard Zinn said it's the highest form of democracy, and I'm wondering, and you're the perfect people to ask, where are your students when it comes to these issues?
You know, maybe we don't have a picture of the whole university community, because in our department we are so committed to training our students to step above all of that, you know, to a higher level of abstraction, and to report all of what's going on, and to avoid, you know, political action. I do know of some students who have taken to the streets, who last year, for instance, participated in the protests regarding immigration and whatnot, you know, when there were all the marches in Tucson. But we had more students who were covering that as new journalists than we did participating in that. I think there are a lot of very politically active students. I think instead of taking to the streets, they throw up a blog. They will share YouTube video. So I do think they're active in that sense. I really get concerned when I'm teaching a law of the press course and I ask them in one of their first classes, okay, let's understand the background of free expression. Why did we revolt against Britain? And I would call on students and they couldn't give a clear, cogent answer as to why. So I think that I think that from an educational perspective, they're not getting all of the values. I think there's a lack of also media literacy. People, when they hear something on TV, they read it, they're going to immediately believe it. I remember my stepfather's mother, who's now passed. She was such a sweet lady, but she believed everything in the tabloids at the supermarket because she said, well, they wouldn't print it if it weren't true. And I think a lot of people, whether we admit it or not, really are quick to believe a headline, believe a soundbite without really critically examining it. I think that's a part of the problem, but Dave may have some other thoughts on that.
Well, actually, we are almost out of time, so I have one question for you, David. How optimistic are you about democracy here in America, with all the technology that we've talked about, with the reticence of the media to go for the throat, so to speak, with the government behaving the way it is?
Well, I am concerned about the trend we've seen for the past 30 years with the decline in civic engagement. The people watching this show, they're engaged. That's why they're watching. Most people don't watch and they don't get involved. And that's what worries me the most. We're seeing it in the survey research. 18 to 29-year-old group, they're totally hostile toward open government, totally hostile toward these issues. Worries me.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I do need to mention to everyone that we had a problem with lights that we're working on, and we thank you for your patience. We have 2 books to recommend. Losing Our Democracy, How Bush, the Far Right, and Big Business Are Betraying Americans for Power and Profit by Mark Green. And the second, It Can Happen Here, Authoritarian Peril in the Age of Bush by Joe Conason. I want to thank you both for coming, and I want to leave everyone with our customary quote. These are the words of Robert M. Hutchins, philosopher and president and chancellor of University of Chicago, who said, "The death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It will be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment." Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.